Hey gang, Dr. CJ here to get you ready to dive into our first major essay, that art analysis. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the tools that you'll be using to do the actual analysis for this essay. So I would jot down some notes as you go, and feel free to pause me throughout so that you can, take those notes, and even if you have your own image out, it might be handy to go with it. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to cover is this visual vocabulary. You heard me mention it in the essay guidelines, so we're going to dive into that throughout this video. Now, artists will use tools to create their artwork, right? And many of these tools and maneuvers carry with them certain meaning or intent. Your task for this essay is to find out for your artwork what that meaning is and consider how the artist uses these tools to help convey that meaning. So most likely you're going to start with thinking about, this is how I feel about a particular image or artwork, and then you're going to reverse engineer and figure out how the artist conveyed that meaning through these particular tools. So you've got 5 to choose from for this particular essay. You have line, shape, space, color, and medium. And we're going to spend time on each individual one to give you a very good handle on exactly how each of them functions. So we're going to start with the first one, line. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use Starry Night as my example throughout this entire module, which, again, remember, you can't use this artwork for your actual essay. So we're going to look and try and find the lines and what meanings those might have here in our artwork. So I'm going to try and use this little laser pointer and draw on the image. Hopefully it works out. So a couple of things to look for when you think about lines in an artwork are the types of lines. We'll start with the easy ones. Vertical and horizontal. Vertical lines go up and down, horizontal goes side to side, right? So some horizontal lines in this, we've got, right, the major wind there. We've got our horizon is a nice horizontal line. And as far as vertical lines, we've got our church steeple here, and even our big tree up front. Yes, this is a tree. Most people think it's anything but a tree, but it's a tree. This poplar tree up front. So that creates this vertical line. Now, in the same way, you can think about the types of lines, right? So up here, we've got the very curvy lines, right? Everything's very soft and smooth, all these kind of turns. Whereas down here, we have all of these kind of sharp, rigid lines. And so that alone kind of gives us some room to play with. If we've got curvy lines up here, sharp lines on here, that could be something. So we'll talk about that. Let me erase. Now, the main thing with lines is that it's going to give us two kind of aspects for meaning. First and foremost, it's going to create direction. So just like lines on a street, they're going to point us in a direction to go. So we're going to start up here at the top. That big line that we first saw, that big curvy line. So that's going to take us over to the right, right? Same thing with this other little guy. It's kind of pointing us over here to the right. Now, our vertical lines typically point up. So we've got our little church steeple that's pointing up, as well as our big tree here that's pointing up as well. So you can think about lines both literally and figuratively, right? So I can kind of help you. So we've got direction. We're going from bottom up and then over to the moon, right? So we've already got some movement going on. The other thing that lines can do is that they can create separation and organization. So the most obvious line we have is the line of the horizon, right? So this big horizontal line cuts straight, whoa, that's really bad, cuts straight across the entire painting. So it separates our painting in this kind of almost 2/3 to 1/3 section. So that creates a separation, right? The sky and the earth. We've also got the line of our little tree here, or I guess our big tree, and that again creates kind of a separation. It takes up a ton of amount of space in the painting, and it sort of blocks off a whole section of it. Now, we don't necessarily have any major idea of what all these lines mean. We'll have to kind of keep playing with it. But so far, we have at the very least a separation of the sky, heavens, the earth, right? And we also have direction. It's pointing us up, and then it's pointing us over to the moon. So we have movement and we have separation. So that's what we can do here with lines. Now with shapes, you're going to do something more or less similar, we're going to start with types. We're going to look for types of shapes. So like round shapes, square shapes, soft shapes, hard shapes, things like that. So we've got a lot of circles up here, right? These nice round circles kind of throughout. Bloop, bloop, all those little stars. But then down here in the earth, we have lots of squares, right? Very sharp, kind of rigid shapes as we move through. Now we also have this triangle, right? Our church creates a very nice triangle for us. And this giant tree does the same thing. So we've got a lot of circles, big soft round shapes, whereas all these geometric shapes, the triangles and the squares or rhombus, like those are all very pointy, right? We also have the moon up here. And so this is going to be fun because you've got a crescent moon, so it's soft on one side and then pointy on the other. So that's something we can kind of play with. Now, generally in art, similar shapes should be doing similar things. So for example, all of our stars and our like big piece of wind here, all of that's kind of working together, right? It's kind of giving off this like aura of like softness and coolness, right? It's very like dreamy and hazy. Whereas down here on the earth, all of our buildings are very sharp and rigid, right? So we have like soft tones up top and then very rigid ones down below. Now something else to think of, we have these other two shapes, the triangles, right? Our tree and our church. And so you can kind of start to apply some like symbolic meaning here. So if the church is supposed to be like religion or spirituality, some kind of like guiding force, right? And then we combo that with line. So now the church is like pointing us upwards. Okay, so like pointing us to heaven. The tree then, since it's also a triangle, would be doing the same thing. So maybe nature and religion here are kind of working together. Or they're both giving us this intent to point us upward. They were both lines pointing us up. They're both similar shapes. Now we have this unique shape, the crescent moon. Now this is interesting. And again, the whole thing here is that we're not looking for like a specific correct answer. You're just kind of playing in the sandbox. But our crescent moon combines our two types of shapes. This idea of softness, organic, gentle, versus the very like sharp, pointed edges, right? But the crescent moon gives us both. So maybe if our lines are trying to get us up to the crescent moon, then maybe our goal here is to find some kind of balance between the two, or bridge the gap between the two, or have some kind of aspect of both heaven and earth together. Again, not a particular answer, but these are the types of things you can start asking to get yourself towards the claim that you get to make. So space is next, and there's a lot we get to do with space. Space is probably one of the most versatile ones we can play with. So two major aspects that you can do, and there are other things you can play with as well, but we're going to just focus on two for the sake of brevity. These two being, number one, positive and negative space. Now, if you watch that little video, you remember that positive space is space that is occupied by something, and negative space is something that is empty or not occupied. Now, don't think of it as like good and bad, like positive is good, negative is bad. It's just a matter of like occupied or empty. Now, positive and negative space work together to help create emphasis and focus. If something is empty, we tend to not want to look at it. So negative space helps frame things that are positive. If you're looking at a giant white wall and there's one little speck of like a mark on it, that positive space of that mark is where your eye is naturally drawn to. So the eye is drawn to positive space. So let's look at how that shakes out here. So we're going to start with our negative space. So all this stuff up top, well, this highlighter might not work all that well. Let's try a different color. We'll do red. So we have that's good. So we have all of this space up here is going to be our negative space, right? The sky is basically empty, but we do, however, have, let's try purple. Yeah, we do have this space of positive space up in the sky, right? But most of our positive space is down below. This is in the earth. So all of this stuff down here is going to be our positive space. A little hard to see, but you get the idea. We have all that positive space of our tree as well. That's a white note. So all of that positive and negative space help kind of like frame, draw our attention to it. Because there's so much negative space here, our eye is just going to kind of bounce to instances of positive space, right? All right, let's clear this away. because we can kind of play with both of those aspects. We're going to swap back to our red here, because you can combine positive and negative space together with this idea of the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds is an artistic and kind of like design element where imagine if you broke the image up into thirds. You kind of lay like a tic-tac-toe pattern over it. So we're going to do that here. And across and across. Well, it's not quite even, but you get the idea. And so this does a couple of things for us. This gives us like language to talk about like where stuff is. So it's like, okay, like the middle third or the right third, stuff like that. So that can kind of help. But the design element of the rule of thirds is that the most important aspect of the image should be in the middle third. Because, you know, if you're taking a photograph, you want your subject to be there in the middle. So when we're looking at this artwork and we look at the middle third, we notice that it's negative space. There's nothing in the middle third. There's nothing for us to look at. And so our eye is naturally drawn to the middle third because that's the center of the image. But Van Gogh positions this where there's no positive space there. So our eye has to bounce somewhere else. So we go to the closest aspect of positive space. Most likely that's going to be the bottom third, the earth. Now, you combine that with our lines, things that are taking us up, right, and then our lines that are taking us over to the side, leads us ultimately to that aspect of positive space there with the moon. So again, with the combination of both space and line, we're seeing that there's some kind of movement here, because with the rule of thirds, Van Gogh places us in the center of the artwork with no positive space, and our eye desperately wants to find positive space. So we bounce somewhere, that's our first piece of movement. If we bounce down to the earth, our line takes us back up and the wind takes us over into the moon. And so then we land in the space of positive space surrounded by all of this negative. So again, we have this sense of like a journey. We're moving from one place to the next, and all of these elements are kind of helping us identify that motion. Now, color is the one you're probably most comfortable with, so it's kind of why I saved it for the back end. But color is also going to be very useful, even if your artwork is in black and white. So if you've got a photograph that's in black and white, you can still play with color, and we'll talk about that. First thing you want to do, though, is look at the types of color. Cool colors, dark colors, bright colors, sharp colors, things that are like really like contrasty, dull colors if it's kind of muddy, etc. So most of our colors here are fairly bright, especially up top, right? So we've got like all those bright colors down up here, and then we've got kind of the darker colors down below. So let's look at our specifics. So up top, we've got some nice blue colors, right? As well as some yellows, and as well as some whites, which I can't really draw here. But then down below, we have much darker colors. We've got like dark greens, we've got dark browns, black, and so this creates, again, a certain level of separation. Now, let's say you're walking into a hospital and you see all the walls painted black, dark brown, green. It's not really the place you want to be. It's not a very like inviting, comfortable kind of location. So that creates a certain level of distinction. As opposed to if you walk into a hospital and there's like bright blue walls, everything's white and yellow, there's a certain level of like comfort there. So we have this distinction in these two examples of color sets. We have something more desirable, the brighter, the white, the softer, versus the little darker, the muddier, that kind of aspect. And especially with our large tree here, it's so shadowy, like it creates a sort of like, I don't really like it here. This isn't quite desirable. Now, you can say too that these dark greens and things are more like nature attuned, and you're welcome to do that kind of reading as well to see where that takes you. Again, combo that like nature read of your color with a direction that's taking us up. This idea of like nature is in service of getting us to look up and embrace something larger than ourselves. Something like that. But emotion is the easiest thing you get to do with color. So let's go back to yellow. If yellow is our crescent moon here, and yellow is traditionally a color of like joy, it's bright, it's happy, it's a new beginning kind of thing, versus the dark over here of our tree is very gloomy and oppressive, right? And especially if you combo that with the shape of the space of the tree, like it takes up so much space and it's kind of in our face, like it's very like overpowering and gloomy. Combo that with our line now, and we have this motion from gloom to bright to hopeful, right? So this kind of motion, again, is something that you can do. Now, like I said, you can also play with lighting, especially if you're working in photography. Even just because you have a photograph or a sketch maybe that's in black and white, the lighting can do a lot for you as well. Generally speaking, shadows are not where we want to hang out. We as humans tend to want to go brighter. So again, this painting wants us to move from this idea of the darkness, the gloom, up to the moon, which is much brighter and more desirable. Now we're starting to get an idea of like repeated concepts of this motion of movement, but we don't necessarily have like, okay, but why? We'll get to that a little bit next week when we start playing with context, because then you're going to bring in your history to it. But right now, just doing this analysis is getting us there. And even just in the core concepts of like bright colors equal happy and dark colors equal like sad or depressing, like we can start making claims that way as well. So color gives you a lot of space to work with, and it's a very easy one to just kind of start with, just to see what kind of emotions are embedded already. And now we'll do medium. Now medium is probably the hardest one to work with, so if you're a little uncomfortable with it, you can bail, that's fine. Again, you only need 2 ultimately for the essay. But medium is the type of artwork. If it's a painting, a photograph, line art, sketch, blah, 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 all those have different kind of aspects to it. So like, for example, a photograph is very representative of a moment in time. It's a literal representation, as opposed to a painting is typically more figurative, metaphorical, symbolic, things like that. Line art is something like for architecture or a sketch, anatomy, is meant to kind of convey a very specific amount of information, whereas a sketch is just kind of like general idea, blueprints sort of idea. So your medium does a lot for you. Now your medium is not only the type of artwork that it is, but it's also the materials used. So like oil painting, pencil, black and white versus color photography, mosaic, things like that. So like with oil paintings, those lines tend to be really smudgy, really kind of blurred, and that sort of like doesn't give us hard details to work with. It just kind of gives us the big idea. Versus pencil, those lines are very sharp. We get a lot more hyper details there. Color photo versus black and white photo, again, we're conveying either a moment in time or a intention or concept. And then something like a mosaic is like all these disparate pieces coming together to form something large. Quilt or thread work would do something similar. Now you've also got style. So style is like impressionism, which is what the style is, realism, surrealism, or for photograph you've got like a candid photo or like a posed photo or a studio photo. And all of that's going to come with it a certain level of meaning. So let's take Starry Night again here, for example. So this is a painting, right? So it's not representative of something literal. And it's an oil canvas. So all these lines are very blurred. It's very dreamlike, very whimsical, right? So we're just kind of getting like big ideas and concepts. And then Van Gogh's style, his artistic style, was Impressionism or Post-Impressionism. And again, root word of that is just impression. We're just getting like an impression of this. So this isn't going to be a specific kind of like aspect or view or journey. Although, once we learn with context, it is actually the view of Van Gogh's room. But this is supposed to be something that anyone can put themselves into. This is just the concept, an impression. And that can give us a lot of meaning, kind of helps lift the realism of the moment away and gives us the opportunity to say and connect with it on a completely separate level. So like we were not born in the 1800s, early 1900s, so we're a little separated from the timeline of this painting. But because it's impressionistic, it's just giving us an impression. There's a certain level of timelessness to it. So you can play with that a little bit with meaning. Again, this is a trickier one to play with, but some mediums are very useful, especially with photography, so really pay attention to that if that's your jam. And once you kind of play in the sandbox, then you get to start making claims. So this is where you kind of like spread all of your work out. You see like, okay, which aspects have the most that I can work with? Which elements help support your claim the most? Consider that meaning, that emotion, that feeling, and how can you connect your analysis, these pieces of line, shape, space, color, or medium, which ones most effectively get you to that claim? So for me, as far as Starry Night is concerned, I felt that line is helping create direction, which is pointing us up and to the right. And then space is rule of thirds, says that the focus isn't in the center, which means that we have to move somewhere else. So no matter where we're looking in this painting, it gets us to focus on some kind of motion, that we are constantly moving. We feel the wind move us to one side, the tree and the church are lifting us up, there's a separation of the sky and heavens, there's some kind of journey here, and ultimately it's all pointing us there to the moon. So there's some kind of meaning there for that, and that's the claim I get to make. Now once you start to bring in your context, which we're doing next week, you get to start putting in a little bit more like validity and like specific terms and like really like concrete meaning behind that, and that's why we have that context, because it's going to help us really like dive into it. You can easily make a claim about this artwork without context, but that makes it more just like pure opinion. An academic, a humanities kind of analysis is going to require a little bit of both. But anyway, that's what I've got for these guys. I hope most of this phase is just going to be brainstorming for you, playing in the sandbox, seeing what sticks. Don't panic is the number one rule. Again, there's no like one correct answer. Just kind of play with it. See what comes up. If you have questions, by all means message me. But next week you're going to have an assignment that's going to let you do this with your own artwork. So I'm going to get to see a little bit of how things are working on the ground, and we'll take care of that next week. But for now, have fun playing in the sandbox, and I can't wait to see what everyone comes up with.